committee meeting on the update to the Green Building Incentive Policy. I am Eric Berkey, member of the Planning Commission. I'm going to be chairing this LRPC meeting. Tonight, we are holding a hybrid public meeting, which enables remote electronic participation as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy adopted on July 7, 2022. I'm looking online. So we do have Planning Commissioner. I see Commissioner Bagley participating virtually, and then we have Commissioners Lantoni and Peterson here with me in the room.
Or he's in the others invited, but he's not here.
Right, only the four that are
right. Those are the only people in the meeting so far.
Only for you.
Right. So we'll get to other commissioners if they joined. Okay, a couple specifics about tonight's hybrid environment. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using the Microsoft Teams link provided on the LRPC webpage, the county's events calendar, and the email notifications sent to LRPC subscribers. Additionally, there's a dial-in phone option for those who would like to use it. For planning commissioners joining virtually, so I'm looking at you, Commissioner Bagley. If anyone loses internet connectivity during tonight's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you're called upon. Please turn off sound to any other devices around you to minimize interference. If you're joining using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed, and we'll talk about when it's appropriate to turn it on. The meeting chat in Microsoft Teams is active for two purposes: to assist participants who need technical support, and for participants to pose brief or clarifying questions to the larger audience. While the clarifying questions will be monitored, they will not be formally acknowledged. Staff may address these questions as appropriate. The Teams chat should not be used for discussion or inappropriate statements. Those who are planning to provide public comment may do so only at the end of the meeting, as the chat is not used for that purpose, because all public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony periods. And just a nice reminder for everybody in the room here to speak up slowly and clearly to allow the virtual participants to hear you. I think we generally get pretty good microphone coverage in here, but it's never a bad idea to speak up. If commissioners such as Commissioner Bagley wishes to participate virtually, then just go ahead, turn your video feed on and raise your hand, and we'll monitor those feeds. Additional notes, unlike the Planning Commission's regular hearings, the LRPC agenda item is not a public hearing, and therefore public comment is at the chair's discretion. But given the attendance tonight, I think it's pretty likely we'll have opportunity for public comment at the end, and I'll address that as we get closer. I will call for speakers at the end of the meeting after the LRPC discussion has concluded. Those attending virtually will speak first, followed by in-person attendees. The speaking time allotted will depend upon the number of speakers we have this evening. Gonna be honest here, probably not gonna have a ton of speakers, so I think we can be a little generous with the time. That's probably not gonna be an issue. If you're attending virtually, please indicate in the chat that you'd like to provide comment, and Ms. Alfonso Ahmed will acknowledge your request in the Teams chat. We'll make sure we get everybody. If you're called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that's located on your meeting command bar, and we don't have the ability to unmute you, and you will be muted when your time has concluded. Don't worry, I'll let you know how much time you have, though, once we do public comment. Alternatively, public comment may also be provided in the public comment form that's posted on the LRPC webpage. And of course, as always, this is a public forum. Tonight's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website, and all information associated with tonight's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to Virginia Freedom of Information Act requirements. Okay, excellent. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. So we're going to do introductions. So I believe we have a quorum because we have 3 planning commissioners present. So I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'm going to go to the planning commissioners, and then we'll do staff. So we'll do it that way. So again, my name is Eric Berkey. I'm a member of the Planning Commission, and I am chairing tonight's meeting.
Yeah, Jim Lantelli, Planning Commission.
Planning Commission.
And I think we have Commissioner Bagley online.
Leah Bagley, Planning Commission.
Okay. And then other folks online, if you could introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Paul Roman. I sit on the air team for the county. I'm the Green Building Program Manager.
And I'm John Bloom. I'm representing the Sierra Club and just kind of taking it in, and we'll probably have a comment at the end. Thanks.
Great to have you, John. And then Natasha in the room.
Yes, Natasha Alfonso Ahmed, and I'm with the Planning Division staff.
I'm Vicki Kishel. I'm an architect with DES.
Dimitri McBride, I'm the Bureau Chief of the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Management, DES.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. So we've done that. And so I think we're on to our one agenda item tonight, which is the update to the Green Building Incentive Policy. So I don't see Margaret online. Who's going to start the staff presentation?
So there's no staff presentation. I mean, sorry, there's no, I got confused. Paul is the one who's going to be doing the presentation.
Okay.
He's just going to share
Got it.
directly.
Okay.
I thought you said applicant.
No. I'm sorry. I said Margaret. Sorry. Because I saw Margaret on here.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah. So Paul, the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, if you could speak up just a little bit, and yeah, and make it full screen instead of. Close that. And I can't really see it from here. Just give me a minute.
Right. I think you can make it.
Oh, I think he's sharing his desktop instead of.
Oh, are you sharing your desktop?
Yeah, maybe make sure you're sharing the screen instead of just your desktop, like the window
Right.
that it's in, like the PDF window.
Okay. Let me. Sorry about that.
Like when you go to share, you can either share screens or share windows.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let me try that.
You want to make sure to share just that window, and then you probably should be able to enlarge it.
So down on the bottom where it says full screen, if you click that, what does it do? That's better.
Yeah, Jim, I'll probably join here. I'll look at my computer too.
I can't really make it any bigger with this because it just goes off.
Yeah.
It's the presentation on the website.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, so this afternoon.
Yeah, I'll pull that up
Sorry,
too.
It is on the website.
Yeah. I think we're good to go.
Okay, sounds great. Well, hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Roman, as I mentioned before, and I'm the Green Building Program Manager for the county. I sit on Arlington's Initiative to Rethink Energy team, or AIR for short, in the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Management. Tonight, I'm joined by my colleague, Vicki Kishel. Vicki, as she just mentioned, as an architect and consultant for the county's Green Building Program, and I'm also joined by Dimitri McBride, the Office of Sustainability's Bureau Chief. Tonight, Vicki and I will be presenting the proposed update to the county's Green Building Incentive Program. This includes the context and goals, the history of the program, the evolution of industry standards, and the summary of the GBIP proposal update. Also, as part of tonight's briefing, we'll be holding a Q&A session at the end. So again, thank you all for allowing us to present tonight, and we look forward to answering any questions at the end. So with that, we can move on to the agenda. So here's the agenda for tonight's meeting. We'll start with the Arlington community context and goals. We'll look at the history and evolution of the GBIP and industry standards, and then we'll review the GBIP updates and proposal. So let's start with the Arlington community context and goals. You may already be familiar with the county's Fast Facts profile. This one is from 2024. But if you're not familiar with this, it provides metrics for various categories such as people, housing, and transportation. I'm not going to read each of these fast facts from the Arlington profile, but in relation to sustainability, it does tell a story. When you're looking at transit, we're served by multimodal transportation that connects us to several diverse uses in the community, whether that be within walking, biking, or bus or rail distance. The county is also the smallest self-governing county in the U.S., occupying slightly less than 26 square miles, which also means we're densely populated, with a population of around 67% living in planning corridors. And when you narrow this percentage down, in combination with the Arlington housing stock, you're looking at 72% of our housing stock units being multifamily. So when you're thinking about the current built environment in relation to the previously mentioned metrics, and when you're combining the aspects of green buildings, sustainability, and the post-pandemic world, it creates this story and sense of urgency in how the county adapts to the marketplace. And as we know, the county's green building program is the primary tool to lower carbon emissions in the private sector. So as we benchmark metrics like those in the Fast Facts profile, we'll be able to address how the county continues to lower its energy use intensity and create healthy internal environments among the private building stock. As part of Arlington County's community goals, the overarching sustainability and energy goals are addressed in the county's community energy plan, or CEP, as it's referred to. If you're not familiar with the CEP, it is Arlington's long-term vision for transforming how we generate, use, and distribute energy in the county, and it sets Arlington on a path to becoming a carbon-neutral community by 2050. The private building sector plays a significant role in the community energy plan. If the intent is to become a carbon-neutral community by 2050, then the GBIP will continue to be used as a primary tool in addressing energy efficiency and building performance. For example, various goals, such as improving energy efficiency by 30 to 40% by 2050, and 50% more efficient than Virginia Code for new buildings, are some of the items encapsulated in the CEP, which leads me to my next point here. And then we'll address this further when we summarize the GBIP proposal. But just as a teaser, we're not only looking at new construction in this update, but also existing buildings and adaptive reuse or conversion. So we can address energy efficiency, ongoing performance, and carbon sinks in our existing building stock, while also economically revitalizing our neighborhoods. Here we have Arlington's 2016 greenhouse gas emissions inventory. The main point to note here is that over half of the emissions inventory is produced from the building sector, making this the largest source of emissions in the county, with commercial buildings being the largest component. And as we can see from the figure, yes, from 2007 to 2016, the overall emissions, but specifically in this case, the building sector, have continued to decline. But as mentioned prior, if the county plans to become a carbon neutral community by 2050, the existing properties within this sector and subsector need to be addressed, and the GBIP needs to continue to focus on stringent energy performance and carbon reduction in new construction. Here's a further breakdown of the county-wide GHG emissions. As noted on the screen, commercial buildings and multifamily residential make up almost 40% of the county-wide GHG emissions from the 2016 report. And when looking at the current scenario, as well as future of Arlington County's climate, we can't forget to address the local environmental and health vulnerabilities. So due to climate change, Arlington is projected to experience more than 14 days of extreme heat over the next 30 years, which is over 105 degrees Fahrenheit. And then thus, this leads to a human health impact such as cardiovascular disease, asthma, stroke, and other chronic conditions. And regarding the environment, we'll continue to see warmer winters and also the potential for increased rainfall and flooding. And lastly, under the community goals, the revitalization of underperforming and vacant buildings. Here we have referenced the county's Commercial Market Resiliency Initiative, or CMRI as it's known. You may or may not be familiar with this, but it is Arlington's strategy to achieve market-based solutions and address building supply vacancy rates by specifically repositioning and converting obsolete commercial inventory. So based on the fact sheet that you're seeing on the screen, the commercial office vacancy rate has increased since 2019, which is in part due to the pandemic. And in return, the share of the tax base has declined. So to meet the new model of working, whether it be fully remote or hybrid, the county created CMRI 2.0 to meet those changes in the market. So we're working closely with the county's Economic Development Office to cross-functionalize CMRI and the Green Building Incentive Program, as the intent overall is to lower EUI, reduce carbon emissions, and economically revitalize neighborhoods. And now we'll look at the history and evolution of the GBIP and industry standards. So the county's Green Building Incentive Program has a rich and detailed history. So I'll provide a short summary for those familiar with it. So it was created in 1999 and adopted by the county board shortly thereafter, and it started as a pilot program. The purpose was to establish a voluntary program to incentivize private sector high-performing buildings beyond state code and Dillon rule restrictions. The original program only applied to commercial offices and offered up to 0.25 FAR bonus density in exchange for obtaining LEED Silver certification from the United States Green Building Council, also known as USGBC. In 2003, the eligibility expanded to all site plan projects. And in 2009 and in 2012, the program was reviewed and updated again with the adjustment of bonus density based on market acceptance of the LEED standard, as well as planning and correlation with the greenhouse gas reduction goals in the community energy plan. Then in 2014, there was a major update that required ongoing energy use reporting and Energy Star post-occupancy certification for offices. And then the recent major update in 2020, the board adopted the new policy, which requires LEED Gold certification and accounts for the Arlington County baseline prerequisites and extra list items, and the increased energy efficiency performance and carbon savings. So with each update, more stringency was adopted. The trending industry standards. So this sets up the conversation for the full debrief of the proposal in the forthcoming slides. But through our analysis and benchmarking literature review of other jurisdictions, as well as insight from industry leaders regarding new sustainable technologies, updated certifications, and more, these are the 4 key areas that we've targeted in the proposed GBIP update. Starting with performance-based certifications in areas such as the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, adopting a stretch code that requires a third-party certified energy rating, and in the state of New York, where they've not yet adopted the proposed update to their stretch code, but for the 2023 stretch code, NYSERDA is including a way to incorporate the Passive House standard. Next is accountability and performance standards. So this can be done through benchmarking or through a third-party certification that is based on actual energy performance and not predictive modeling. Third is the design focus on passive strategies. We're seeing buildings within our climate zone that are designing and constructing passive buildings, which then in return avoids energy intensity and provides healthier and safer spaces for tenants. And lastly is the decarbonization emphasis. As we know, the most sustainable building is the one that's already built. So through adaptive reuse or existing building retrofits, one has the potential to lower its operational carbon and ultimately create less embodied carbon. And here on this slide, this leads into the GBIP proposal. Throughout our benchmarking literature review of the program and its history, and looking towards the future of industry standards, we've noted various key takeaways for as why we're updating the program. For one, the building sector accounts for 39% of all community GHG emissions. Second, buildings should continue to account for their actual energy operational performance, as we've acknowledged through industry studies that certifications that use predictive modeling at times intrinsically fall short for their actual energy performance at the back end. And I won't read all of these, but I'll just mention one more. Just in the current real estate market, the interest rates for lending have increased, and developers may now have shorter investment timelines and near-term turnovers for their buildings. So the incentive for bonus density through the green building program may at times may not be as persuasive because it typically prolongs profitability timelines. So now we'll get into the proposal. So first, why are we doing this? And second, what is new in the GBIP update? So as I mentioned prior, the program's history for the past 23 years has been rich and detailed. It has been impactful and an influential program and has set the pace in the green building market. And as we know, it has been mirrored by other jurisdictions, not just locally, but nationally over the past 2 decades. But as with any great program, there comes a point in time to complete a deep dive analysis on the uptake, metrics, feedback, and more, and look ahead to the future of the green building market to further advance the county's climate goals. And with the climate scenario, new modeling, new expectations, and the gap between Virginia Building Code and the International Building Code, the timing of our outlook sped up the process to complete an update. So as we completed an in-depth analysis of the program and through our study, we came to the results that one, bonus density creates longer profitability timelines, and given the current market, the interest rates on loans can generate shorter timelines for investment. We also acknowledge, based on studies, additional height has the potential to create ecological, political, and social challenges. Second is the need to address the efficiency of the existing building stock in the private sector, as well as continue to address energy efficiency in new construction. And to do this leads to the third point, which is to propose a new incentive in the form of tiered financial incentives rather than bonus density or additional to bonus density. So doing this will lead to a more streamlined approach in a way that we believe the private development community will utilize the new GBIP pathways to help further advance upon the CEP goals and fully address our climate challenges in the county. So with all that being said, what's new in the GBIP proposal? First, we decided to streamline the new construction options, so proposing LEED Platinum certification at the two lowest tiers of FAR at 0.25 and 0.35, and requiring either ILFI zero carbon or ILFI zero energy at the 0.45 and 0.55 FAR tiers, and eliminating 0.7 FAR due to its non-market uptake. Next, we'd like to start financially incentivizing actual energy performance rather than predictive modeling. So we're proposing a new pathway under new construction called the Climate Adaptation Pathway, which uses Passive House International US, or FIAS for short, but the program's zero certification. And then we're also proposing an existing buildings pathway and an adaptive for use pathway, both of which will have a financial incentive attached. And moreover, we're also proposing a 6-month education/training program post-county board adoption, but prior to the full enforcement for industry members such as developers, building owners, contractors, subcontractors, architects, and those alike to learn more about the process, as well as the new certifications and requirements in the GBIP update. We're proposing this because we acknowledge that those within the development community may not be as familiar with certifications such as Passive House. So developing curriculum and educational sessions will hopefully curb the apprehension of pursuing a more stringent standard. Just to wrap up this portion, because what we're proposing is intensely different compared to prior iterations, we're looking at this as a 5-year pilot with the flexibility built in to adapt to the market, as well as a 5-year grant program due to those financial incentives. So here's the chart of the GBIP proposal. In the upcoming slides, we'll break this down to each section, but this provides a high-level summary. Starting on the left-hand column, there are 3 types of construction for this GBIP proposal. First is new construction, second is existing buildings, and third is conversion or adaptive reuse, and then each type of construction has a designated pathway. So starting with new construction, there are 2 options. The first is the traditional pathway. So this is like the current GBIP, in which we are offering bonus density to incentivize private developments, but we're proposing an upgrade from LEED Gold to LEED Platinum at the lower FAR tiers, as well as updating and proposing new baseline prerequisites and extra list items. And at the higher FAR tiers, we're Living Future Institutes, or ILFI, but there's zero carbon or zero energy certifications as 2 options in lieu of LEED. So International Living Future Institute, or again, ILFI for short, is based on actual energy performance rather than predictive modeling, as well as requiring no combustion on site. So keeping the traditional pathway as an option for new construction, we'll continue to build upon and advance the carbon reduction goals of the current program. The second option for new construction is the Climate Adaptation Pathway. This pathway will use Passive House International US, or FIAS, but the program's zero certification. If you're not familiar with FIAS, it is today's highest building energy standard that relies on a combination of passive design concepts to immensely reduce the building's energy use intensity. And much like ILFI, this certification is based on actual energy performance and requires no combustion on site. And attached to the climate adaptation pathway is a proposed financial incentive, as well as offering 0.25 FAR. And at the start of a project, we're proposing nominal incentives that go towards the FIAS feasibility study and modeling for the project. Moving down, the second type of construction is for existing buildings. This pathway will focus on unprecedented carbon reduction potential in the county's existing commercial building stock. This pathway also financially awards projects if they meet the requirements. To obtain this incentive, the applicant will first need to prove the building has undergone a retrofit, and then once confirmed, the project can either achieve the award through Energy Star certification or by achieving a 10% reduction in the building's energy use intensity, so whichever yields that higher Energy Star score. And then finally is the third type of construction, conversion or adaptive reuse. The main reasoning behind this is the immense carbon savings from building reuse and carbon reduction and continuing operations. This pathway will be for existing commercial buildings that are converting to residential, and we're proposing a financial incentive in two options. The first being a market rate award per unit, and the second is an affordable housing rate award per unit. And for both incentive options, the applicant will need to be awarded LEED version 4 gold or LEED version 5 silver when USGBC ballots the newest version of LEED by next year, as well as a 25% energy use intensity reduction through modeling. So now we'll start to provide more detail about each type of construction and designated pathway, starting with the traditional pathway and new construction. So I'm not going to reiterate each line item here, but as I mentioned in the prior slide, the traditional pathway under new construction will be like the current Green Building Incentive Program. The bonus density tiers remain, aside from the 0.70 FAR, and there is a proposed upgrade to LEED Platinum from LEED Gold at the lower FAR tiers for 0.25 and 0.35 FAR. And there's also the proposed removal of LEED certification at 0.45 and 0.55 FAR with the replacement of the ILFI options. And then the coming slides here, I'll provide further detail about the updated and new baseline prerequisites and extra list items. So we don't need to spend too much time on this slide since this is being used as a comparison to the next. But this is a summary chart of the current requirements in the 2020 Green Building Incentive Program at each FAR tier. So if you'd like, we can go back to this at the end, but you can also review this in the board report for the 2020 GBIP adoption. And then here we have the summary chart of the proposed traditional pathway in red text, as well as highlighted in yellow are the updates being proposed that I just mentioned before. And again, we can go back to this at the end if you need to see this again. And then here we have the updated and new proposed baseline prerequisites and extra list items. Starting at the top for EV charging infrastructure, will align with the updated criteria for the LEED version 4.1 EV option 1 and option 2 for EV charging stations for at least 5% of parking spaces and EV infrastructure for at least 10% parking spaces. For this baseline prerequisite, we're also looking at the proposed option for e-bikes, but we're monitoring this closely as USGBC revises its LEED version 5 standard and gets that ready for balloting by next year. The next updated baseline prerequisite is equity, diversity, and inclusion. We're proposing an update to the language that reflects upon the county's goals, as well as the significance and importance of EDI in private real estate development. There are three proposed options that a project may choose from for this prerequisite. The first option is to complete an environmental justice assessment using the Building EJ tool, and then provide a narrative based on the findings and what the project team will do to assess environmental justice and social equity issues within the development surrounding area. The second option is to align with International Living Future Institutes, or ILFI, but the Building Challenge Core Imperative 17, also known as Universal Access, which essentially makes all public spaces on a project accessible to all members of the public and includes the principles of universal design for those with disabilities. And the last option for the DEI requirement is in alignment with ILFI's Challenge Core Imperative 18, also known as Inclusion, which provides the option to donate 0.1% of the construction cost to a nonprofit organization focused on equity and inclusion, but specifically would be looking at this for Arlington County. Moving down the list for the new baseline prerequisites, the first is a whole building life cycle assessment. So this will be in alignment with the LEED version 4.1 materials and resources credit, option 2, path 1 for building life cycle impact reduction. Next is construction waste management. Here we're proposing that no less than 65% of non-hazardous construction waste shall be diverted from landfill. And lastly is the integrative process workshop with Arlington County Green Building staff. Here we're proposing that the project team schedule a time with staff to discuss the sustainability elements of the project at each design stage. So whether that's conceptual, we're starting at schematic, but all the way through construction documents. And then on the right-hand side, for the new proposed extra list items, first is building electrification, fairly self-explanatory, but requiring the installation of non-combustible mechanical systems and appliances in all spaces. Second is the whole building life cycle assessment for a 10% reduction, largely similar to the baseline prerequisite, but requiring a 10% reduction in global warming potential. And the third proposed extra list item is Fitwell certification for 1 star. And with that, I'll hand it off to Vicky to debrief on the remaining pathways.
Thanks, Paul. I'll just tell you 2 advanced slides, I guess. So this is the first of the 3 new pathways, climate adaptation. So let's look at the details. There are 2 basic parts to this. This is a new construction pathway, as the traditional pathway is, but it's much simpler and more stringent. There are 2 basic parts to it. The FIA Zero certification that Paul talked about, which is a performance-based certification. And then there's a suite of requirements that address local Arlington vulnerabilities. We're calling this the green infrastructure part. It actually also includes bird-friendly design and a few other things here. Again, simple because there's not a list of county baseline prerequisites, but in fact, some of those, or many of those prerequisites are actually included within FIAS Zero. For example, they have an EV requirement and EV ready infrastructure requirement. And as Paul had mentioned, this is a non-combustion option, all electric. What you see here, Paul, you had mentioned the incentives already, that are the financial incentives. We're giving a modest amount of bonus density at the moment. This is the first draft of all of this. So we have just received public comment and letters, and we'll be talking with people making modifications. But the bonus density we're proposing for this is the 0.25 they are. And then on top of that, there is funding, financial incentives. They begin with an incentive for a feasibility study. So if you're a developer and you're intrigued by this option, the proposal is the county will give you up to $5,000 to study whether it is feasible for your building. Please, can we?
Yeah, can we?
Do we need to hold?
Yeah, is that a clarifying question or? Why don't we just hold?
Can you make a note of it?
We'll just do clarifying questions.
Don't lose that thought.
Yeah, once we've gotten through. Don't worry, we'll have plenty of time.
So, they can study whether it would work. We're hoping that this will be something that will draw them in. This is based on a successful program in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, authored by Mass Save. And they have found a lot of success with the offering of such a feasibility study grant, essentially. Then that is followed by FIAS modeling. This is very extensive. And then if you choose this pathway, you will receive an award, which we've pegged at $2 per square foot upon project certification. And you see our sample math here. We used as straw men for these calculations existing developments. We took their GFA and number of units, and what if such a project were to be built into this climate adaptation pathway, what it would essentially cost the county. Onward, Paul. Next slide, please. So why? It's more rigorous. It's also simpler. We are talking about, for that second part of this, it addresses equity in green infrastructure. We have a tree equity focus. And then very importantly, a key part of this is that it addresses our local vulnerabilities. Flooding is one, particularly for rainfall, pluvial flooding. Urban heat island, I'll show you the maps. Only going to have more of that. Air pollution, for sure. These buildings are so tight. Their indoor air quality, though, they manage moisture quite well, and they have ventilation that is superb. So their indoor air quality is excellent. They also remain stable in the case of power grid outages. They're indoor environments for ours. Another proven part of FIUS. Certainly noise attenuation. Many multifamily buildings, for example, on automotive corridors, particularly this one in New York City, we talked to Dattner Architects, who were the architects of 425 Grand Concourse. The residents are experiencing the benefits in terms of sound, for sure, as well as all the other things I've mentioned. And then we'll look at the question of uneven green development in Arlington and the tree canopy equity proposal that we have. So next slide, please, Paul. FIUS Zero, what does it do? What is its focus? Passive measures. Insulation. There's a project that just cut ribbon. It's complete. It's in Washington, D.C. It's a FIUS project to think about insulation there. This is at Berry Farm in Southeast D.C. I think they have 69 or 69 in the brief. I mean, that's the kind of insulation we're talking about a lot, right? That's part of the passive measures. Their goal at FIUS is to reduce the use of energy for cooling and for heating. Mentioned the prohibition against fossil fuel combustion on site. They have a renewable energy requirement. It's one of those things that makes it intrinsically kind of equal to what we do with the baseline prerequisites in the traditional pathway. You can essentially buy RECs. You don't have to have necessarily on-site solar that they encourage. And then the fenestration, window, performance, moisture design, et cetera, as you see here. Energy Star equipment is required. EV charging required. Windows is triple paint. So state of the art. And those have apparently been coming down in costs over the last year, quite a bit. Next slide, please, Paul. Paul mentioned, we want to have an educational series of sessions. We'll be focusing a lot on things like FIUS, things like bird-friendly design, but all of this will be part of the focus of that. So for the climate adaptation pathway green infrastructure, here are the enumerated components of that, where you will have vegetated areas, landscaped areas. These need not just be horizontal, they might be vertical. So walls, they have to be equal to 30% of the lot area. The idea of using native plantings, tree canopy coverage as appropriate to the neighborhood you are building in, foresters will rule on. The ecologically needy sites receiving more ecological amenities or increased tree canopy coverage. This is something that is a component of this and an equity measure. We've talked to our stormwater folks and we're refining the idea of how much of a storm you would have to retain on site. Dark skies for lighting. We're also talking about this question in response to public comment. The 3000 Kelvin as a color temperature not to be exceeded. We're thinking of lowering that in response to public comment. I realize the public comment refinements are yet to come, but I just thought I'd mention that we're listening and taking those into account. And then the bird friendly last bullet here. 100 feet above grade is what the District of Columbia has. We are mirroring what they have because we're the other side of the Potomac, which is the tree, the bird fly over area. So 100 feet above grade for this. Next slide, please, Paul. We studied the incremental costs of FIUS. A lot of this too will go into the educational sessions. The costs go down with every passing year, but they also go down with developer familiarity with building in this way. The architects and engineers we've spoken with have stressed that if you have the continuity in your project teams as you're building to these FIUS standards, that after one time, things become much less expensive. The upcharge is not that great. There have been recent studies that show maybe a premium of from 0 to 5%. The first one, to our knowledge, that was done locally now some years ago in the early 2010s was about 8% of the cost premium. And you can compare it to LEED incremental costs for LEED Gold or LEED Platinum, 7.5%, 9.5%, something like that. Next, please, Paul. The next slide will be a graphic from one of the studies showing what the actual energy use intensity, these are Philadelphia buildings. These are affordable housing buildings. You see that if you're building to code, your median energy use intensity is 58.7, LEED 47.4, passive house. It's really a remarkable difference. Energy use intensity is this ratio of K BTUs, or 1,000 British thermal units per square foot per year, if you want to know what that is. Okay, that's the first of the new pathways. Now on to the second. This is adaptive reuse. We're excited about this too, because we need this. Onward, Paul, to why we're doing this, the benefits of it. Vacancy. Eliminate that if we can. That really sucks the life out of Arlington and other, certainly downtowns everywhere. Economic life, social life, there's a real premium for the county in reducing vacancy. As you know from probably the CMRI study, our economic development folks have identified buildings that are most compatible for conversion. However, one question we've gotten is, will this pathway only limit to those projects? No. Any office to residential conversion is eligible. If you can do it, we want to hear from you. This, as Paul has mentioned, it's more LEED oriented. In this case, it's for gold or V5 silver with a modeled EUI reduction, and you also would fulfill those prerequisites that are true for traditional pathway. I think we can go on. Please, Paul, next slide. Here are examples where we, again, have taken our strawman projects, done the math. As you see, the incentives are these financial incentives. Would they be, in one case, we were looking at $1,500 per unit, or 2,000 affordable, or 2,000 market rate, 2,500 affordable, just to do the math on those alternatives. And that's what you see here. Onward, Paul, please. Existing buildings pathway. This is the final of the 3 new ones. So the eligibility will be buildings that have behind them 5 years of operation, basically. They've received their final certificate of occupancy at least 5 years ago. They also will have undertaken energy upgrades or retrofits. We will, in the educational sessions, talk a lot about this. What is an eligible retrofit? What is an eligible? And then to receive the incentives, you must have Energy Star certification. If you are already a high performer, you can seek this pathway, but you have to produce a 10% reduction in EUI, whichever will yield a higher Energy Star score. So on this pathway, with Energy Star certification, that's only valid for a year, of course, but it's based on a year's worth of energy data. You have the potential, depending on the duration of this program as a pilot, to renew if you get new Energy Star certifications for up to 5 years. This is because, as Paul had mentioned, existing buildings, energy use reduction, carbon reduction, key to meeting our carbon goals. So we think this is a really key pathway for that. That's where our carbon intensity is as a county. Next, please, Paul. More math. Same idea, you know, what happens with our strawman projects if you have, you know, them funded or incentivized for 75 cents per square foot for buildings up to a certain limit, and that reduces if you have a really big building. And then what would that incentive be if cumulative over 5 years? And with that, Paul, it's time to turn it back over to you for the summary of incentives and conclusion.
Great. Thanks, Vicky. So I'll wrap things up here, starting with a summary of incentives. So this reiterates and summarizes what each incentive is and for which pathway it's involved with. The traditional pathway and new construction will be bonus density only, and the remainder will be financial incentives with the addition of 0 to the climate adaptation pathway under new construction. And lastly, here we have the community benefits and how it serves multiple priorities. For example, it replaces modeled savings with verified performance. It will lower utility bills for tenants through pathways such as the climate adaptation pathway, and it creates healthier and resilient buildings for the community and its members. And in addition, it allows for a 6-month tolling period for a dynamic education and engagement program that will be promoted for the industry to learn more about the new standards that we're proposing. And then here we have next steps and discussion. So what you're seeing on the screen is the public engagement plan, probably pretty similar to what you've seen in the past for the GBIP updates, but just the list of some of the stakeholders, whether that's internal engagement, speaking with Arlington Economic Development, our county attorney's office, CPHD through their department meetings, and then our extensive external public engagement, which included commissions such as C2E2 and the Energy Committee, LRPC for you all. We've been working with NIOP as well. We've also set up a sub-working group meeting with them prior. We were speaking with private developers, a handful of them, some market rate and some affordable housing developers, getting their take on the current market in Arlington, what they're dealing with, what's working in the current GBIP and what's not working, and then also asking them what they'd like to see in the next iteration of this GBIP update. So the one that we're proposing now. Other advisory groups, we've spoken to the Chamber of Commerce, and then environmental groups, such as Eco Action Arlington, the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, and others with environmental focus. And then as Vicky mentioned prior, our online public engagement period through Conveo just closed out on the 17th of November. And we're looking to post the feedback as well as addressing those comments and posting that on the website within the first week or the second week of December. So stay tuned for that as well. With that, I'll open it up for Q&A. That's our presentation. Or Vicky or Dimitra, if you have anything else to share. Sorry, I can't see the meeting.
I think I'll take control back.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks for the presentation. So I think what we'll do here is I have a list. So we'll do LRPC discussion. Natasha, did any other commissioners join?
Yeah, from C2E2, Joe McIntyre, but
Great.
not from.
Great. Okay. Got it. Okay. So I think what we'll do, and I'm going to kind of look around the room, and then if folks have thoughts online, but to structure our conversation. So I think we'll do clarifying questions. Well, I have a clarifying question for Vicky because it actually will dictate how I want to order this. So the new baseline prereqs and the extra list items, are those applicable to all of the new pathways?
No.
No, so
No.
it depends.
Not,
Yeah.
not at all to climate adaptation, to
Right.
that pathway. It
Okay.
has no baseline prerequisites.
Right, okay,
They would apply to the adaptive reuse pathway,
okay,
but not to the existing buildings pathway.
okay, that makes sense. Okay, then I'll put that into adapt. So that helps answer my question. All right, so then maybe what we'll do is we'll do clarifying questions and then we can go through the new construction, the adaptive reuse and the existing buildings pathways and see if there's questions or discussion. And then we can, I have a couple questions about the new baseline prereqs and we'll just put those under adaptive reuse. Are there any other discussion items folks have? Jim?
I'll just have some questions.
Okay, does that work for ordering
My
things?
questions are kind of sprinkled throughout. the
Well, let's just-
presentation,
yeah,
so
same.
Let's start
I'll
with
probably be like
let's start with
slide 12.
well,
Right.
let's start with why don't we start with anything was like just clarifying, totally unclear, and then we can kind of go from there. Yeah.
So if it's a 5-year pilot program, do applicants say they want to be part of the pilot, or is every project going to be part of the pilot, or how does that,
It's a good question. I think every project will be a part of the pilot.
that we will require every project? It's not that people opt in
Well, they will
Or
have to
to get
opt
the
in
green
to,
light.
you know, if they want, all of this is voluntary, of course. So yes, they have to opt in.
So following up on that, there's different paths for the same type of project. They can choose which path to take.
There are two paths for new construction. You can do traditional pathway or climate
Right,
adaptation.
that's what I was thinking.
And then if you have an existing building that you want those financial incentives, you would do the retrofits. But then adaptive reuse is actually indeed kind of more like new construction. I mean, you are doing a substantial renovation usually. You must, preserve, we're asking, 50% basically of the building. So
So how do we define, and that was the follow-up, how do we define 50% reuse? Because I've seen some where you strip down to just the concrete.
right.
Everything is gone and then it gets rebuilt. Is that adaptive reuse or is that
No.
not?
That wouldn't be under this. Now, we're trying to leave some wiggle room here for people to show us what they would do. So one idea is you keep 50% of your surfaces, horizontal and vertical, roofs, floors, walls. The other is you keep 50% of your building, square footage basically and structure.
That I could get, I'm on board with. The
Mhm.
first one isn't going to work simply because office buildings, especially the newer ones, everything inside is garbage. I mean, it's just, as you know, the metal 2x4s and the sheetrock, the drop ceilings.
Mm.
There's nothing that's permanent in these offices. It's just stuff. It wouldn't make a good apartment to keep that stuff.
Right.
And the curtain walls don't open, which you don't want in a residential
Right.
structure.
You're not going to be able to
So
keep this
to
one.
really do a true quality conversion that somebody would actually want to live in, you really have to, I think, bring it down to the concrete if it's an office building. So square footage, yeah, I'm on board with that, but keeping vertical walls, other than the core where the elevators and the stairs are, I don't think that's going to work.
Mm. I think you could be right that it wouldn't work. We'd be intrigued to see if there's an example of a building where maybe it would work.
And if it's an experiment, sure. I mean,
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
We'll do it.
But I take your point.
understand.
I take your point.
If anything, just to chime in, if anything, what we've kind of heard anecdotally is more flexibility. I mean, that's challenging enough, even having the guts in the center of the building and then kind of just starting from scratch. Even that is like pretty hard lift, what we've heard.
So if we have projects now that just the garage is being kept, which is great. Yeah, we love that. Yeah, do that. But that wouldn't count as that wouldn't count.
I think not. But actually, I don't know. Paul, can we talk about 3033?
Or can they get some?
In Clarendon?
I thought that we
Right.
decided early on that
Yeah,
we were
it's,
not going
I-
down to the garage.
right. I was going to
It's not
use
that
this example of a project that is just going through now site plan review. It's just been approved to do that. And that is keeping basically the core and the 3 underground levels of garage. And that would not be eligible for these incentives. But it's not that it's not beneficial. Think of the embodied carbon that you're, preserving essentially. And it's also so favorable because it apparently locally, for each underground parking space, a developer might spend up to $100,000.
I know.
Yeah.
That's why we're like.
Wow,
these things.
it's crazy, right? But yeah, so, yeah. But no, that wouldn't be eligible for these incentives. It would take more than.
And switching to another thing, we talked about no combustion on site. This comes up a lot at SPRCs. We're talking about electrification.
Yeah.
They all go, yeah, electric stoves, in the units, electric, fine. But then when we drill a little further, it's like, well, we can't do it for the hot water. It's master hot water, and that has to be gas. So that was number one. And number two is, we want to be able to have restaurants. And restaurants demand gas cooking. So we need to have lines for that. Then the third thing is, well, for the emergency power, we need the generators. The generators are run by gas or oil. So how do we deal with those three things?
If you're doing the climate adaptation pathway and fees, you don't have those combustion sources. But we are at the moment, and this is a bone of contention because there are lots of constituencies in Arlington that want full electrification. We are not going that far. In part, we are trying to acknowledge that there's a grid limit at the moment. Dominion's just sold a lot of energy to serve farms, and our rates are going to go way up. And the grid is, in our e-grid region, as you know, it's powered by natural gas primarily, and some coal and other things. And Dominion is apparently thinking about opening up more natural gas plants to serve the electricity generation needs of these
Well,
server farms.
if I can just clarify that, it really trickles down from the federal government. FERC gave direction to PJM, which is the largest RTO in the entire United States, and includes Virginia, to direct their incumbent utilities to prioritize reliability and to guarantee 115% of projected demand over the next 10 years by just about any means necessary. And because in particular, our problem with Virginia, our challenge, let me put it that way, is that they've licensed so many data centers that are going to go online in a very short period of time. So in less than 15 years, the demand of the entire Commonwealth is going to possibly more than double. So they're looking at, and there is in the Virginia Clean Economy Act, even though they have the renewable portfolio standards, there was a kind of exception for retirement. So Dominion is exercising that, but it's a direction that's coming down from the federal government and the RTO.
But so for my question on the specific building, are they not then allowed to, if they participate, they're not allowed to have a gas generator for emergency power?
They, in the traditional pathway as it stands now, yes, they'd be allowed,
Still allowed.
they would be allowed gas generator,
Okay, so, because that's an emergency issue.
yes.
Fine, I'm happy with that. I don't have a concern with that because it's used very, very rarely, other than testing. Even that's pretty rare. The restaurant issue is more of an issue, and I know there's a lot of push to have restaurants learn how to use induction.
No, exactly.
which is great,
Why not?
but they're really resistant.
We want
The
to see
chefs are
the,
resistant.
the flame.
Yeah, I know.
See the
chefs are
flame. No, I
resistant.
know.
Crazy.
You know?
I know. That's a harder nut to crack.
Well, you know, Jose Andres, you know,
Yeah.
he's like, oh, go electric. So, I mean, why don't we, it would be great to get a clip of him for some of these educational sessions.
I
where
would love
he's
that because I know
saying,
there are
we can do this.
people like him who can bring people along.
Yeah,
So yeah, anything like that.
Yeah.
So that maybe 10 years from now won't be an issue.
Yeah, well, can I chime in there? That seems like a show versus tell situation, though. I think we got to show if it's working, we got to show. You can do all the training videos you want, but somebody has to get word of mouth. They trust that thing works.
But it's not
Because those margins are thin in that industry,
Right.
right?
It's not-
They can't risk.
It's
They
not
can't.
the builder. It's
No, I
the
understand.
potential.
I understand. It's the industry.
Yeah.
That's your audience,
Yeah.
not the developer. I totally agree.
Yeah.
But I think that's a show versus tell thing. You got to
Yeah.
show,
Yeah.
and then they got to trust that it's actually
Yeah.
going to work. Right? Anyway, I'm sorry.
And
go
hot water, I know that's something that some of our developers who said, yeah, we figured out a way to do it, or we think we can do it. And it isn't an issue anymore. But a lot of them come in saying, oh, we need it for the hot water, we need it for the hot water. So I guess that's something you just tell them, sorry, you got to do it. You got to do it. I'd be fine with that. But the one I really had the most concern was
The
the generators.
generators.
At least at this stage for first month.
I have a follow-up question with the generator. So an applicant can still do the traditional pathway, which would give them the ability to do the generators. But we don't want them to do the traditional pathway. We want them to do these new pathways, which gets us all these other benefits that we want in order to meet our goals. So it's kind of a moot point that like, well, they could still do the traditional pathway and get that generator
But
emergency.
they can also do it in the
services,
new
but
path.
No, I think they can't.
They can't.
Can't.
No,
You make, now, that's a question, are the generators required by Virginia Building Code?
golly.
We need to check that.
Yeah,
Because
that's-
if it's not a choice, they
That's,
have to have it.
so the incentive program covers 3 building types: office, multifamily residential, and hotel. So we will check that for those building types.
The code requires a on-site generator.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that always comes up. Where's the generator exhaust going to be?
Right.
How's this going to work?
Right.
Well, and even if code doesn't require it, maybe we still want to make that like one little exception that you still put the line in, but you don't use it for anything except in this emergency
And
situation.
that's what it should be, any period.
Yeah.
It should be just for that. Other than they have to test it every once in a while. But they may need it, their lenders may require it, their insurance may require it, even if the building code doesn't. We have to find those
Well,
other.
even just to keep people safe. I
Well,
mean,
right,
yeah.
you can't get off the 30th floor if there's no electricity to be able.
Can I interject real quick? So 2 things. So it's 8:05, and I'm going to guesstimate that public comment probably will not begin before 8:25, but it very well may occur after 8:25. But I just want to give folks online like a heads up. We won't start public comment until at least 8:25, and then Commissioner Joan McIntyre, you had your hand raised for a question. Go ahead, Joan. If you're speaking, we can't hear you. We can see you, but I can't hear you yet. No, you're on mute. I saw that. Yeah. So Joan, why don't you check your setup? And then when it seems to be working, just go ahead and you raise your hand and I'll loop back. Okay. Because I cannot hear you. Yeah, I see you speaking, but I can't hear anything, unfortunately. And since Paul just spoke, we know that it works, should work on our end. So, well, Joan, you can also, for audio, you can also just dial in on that number on the LRPC webpage. If you want to call in by phone and keep your video on, that works too. But I'm gonna call myself. I had a clarifying question about something a little different. So I think this is probably for Paul. The equity, diversity, and inclusion program, that was a little fast. I mean, it's a very long presentation because there's a lot here,
I know.
so it's all good. But can you go over the three equity, diversity, and inclusion? It sounded like they were basically options for the applicants, and how. I think I'll have more questions, but the first one I think was regards to universal design.
Yeah, so I can go over those again. So we did include three options.
Okay.
The first option is to complete a environmental justice assessment.
Okay.
So using the Building Environmental Justice Assessment tool through USGBC, and then providing a narrative based on those findings and what the project team will do to assess environmental justice and social equity issues within the development surrounding area. So when you're using that tool, it provides, well, you input the project information, it provides a in-depth list of questions that requires narratives for each. It gets into all types of environmental justice issues that may be dealing with the surrounding area of that project. And then again, we'd be asking them to provide that narrative to us and what they would do to assess those issues within that area. The second option, which Eric, I think you were getting to, was to align with the International Living Future Institute's Building Challenge Core Imperative, which is number 17, Universal Access, which makes all public space on a project accessible to all members of the public. So regardless of race, ethnicity, social background, whatever it may be. And then it includes the principles of universal design for those with disabilities too. So when I get into that second part, that's typically built into code anyway, but because it's aligning with the requirements of ILFI and that core imperative, that would be one of those requirements moving forward. And then the third option, or the last one, again, is in alignment with International Living Future Institutes, but their core imperative 18, which is in, and that provides the option to donate 0.1% of the construction cost to a nonprofit organization focused on equity and inclusion, but we would specifically be gearing that towards a nonprofit in Arlington County.
Arlington, what's the nonprofit?
It would be any nonprofit in Arlington County that deals with that's focused on equity and inclusion. So it'd be left up to the developer on their choosing of that nonprofit.
Okay,
That
I have a
helps
couple.
clarify.
I have a couple questions. I'd love to see I know that's a lot. I'd love to see that in writing. I think that would be helpful. There's a lot to unpack there. Really appreciate.
It's in the red text version
The red
that
text.
is,
Okay.
that I think is part of the public review.
Oh, did I not pull that up then? Okay, I'll look.
Yeah.
I don't know.
we can-
Okay, I'll
we can send it to you as well.
yeah, I'll take a look at it.
Yeah.
I'll make a confession. I work in civil rights day job. I'm pretty familiar with EJ, but I'm curious, like, what could be the types of environmental justice? Well, let me back up. So this equity, diversity, inclusion program, is this applicable to all the pathways, or are we only talking about new construction?
New construction for the traditional pathway through LEED, and then as well as the conversion or adaptive reuse pathway as well.
Okay, got it. Okay. And then, so with the universal access, so you talked about principles of universal design with regards to folks with disabilities, but are there other examples of universal access that are not, centric to universal design for folks with disabilities? Like, are there any examples you can give me? I mean, obviously, we would presume that any area that's accessible to a certain color, or race, or sex would be accessible to others. But is there anything, any examples I can wrap my arms around?
I can.
Yeah, go ahead,
Give
Vicki.
you an example with
Okay.
Washington DC, or probably in Arlington too. I mean, park furniture set up to stop the unhoused and others from resting there,
Hostile
lying
design.
down.
Yeah.
Hostile design.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a classic example. Sorry, Paul, I preempted
I have
your
one-
examples.
I have one more thing, Jim, and then I got you. So I struggle with some of things in this lane, not because I don't believe that we should be promoting equity, diversity, inclusion. But I struggle because I'm also, I believe that like what we're doing here should serve like a specific purpose and it should be actionable outcomes. And so I love our nonprofits in Arlington. Here's a good example. It makes me a little uneasy to mandate somebody donate part of construction costs to a third party. Like it does awesome work and I probably may give them my own money, but I'm less clear about the line of advancing diversity, equity, inclusion in these specific buildings in our neighborhoods, and then sort of mandating a contribution be made. That makes me a little like uneasy. I think I want to unpack that a little bit more. The universal access stuff also too. I think we may want to think about that too. I think it makes sense in principle, but there very well may be understandable reasons why buildings maybe design things a certain way. And so I this is tough because this is a conversation we should have, but I don't think I don't know. I'll go to Jim, but I have some questions about how this would play out.
Yeah, totally on board with that. I have exactly the same concerns. I'm really nervous about the required contributions to nonprofits on a number of reasons. One, I wonder whether it's even constitutional, because if you disagree with where the direction they're going, you're being forced to give the money to that. So I'm a lawyer by background, so I sort of look at things that way. So I'm really concerned about that. Number two, even if it's done, having us control who those nonprofits are makes me even more nervous, because then we're directing a specific point of view. Because we have a lot of nonprofits in Arlington. You can make your list, and I might be horrified by it. I may make a list that you may be horrified by. Third person may be one that both of us would be horrified by that person's.
Yeah.
Because there's such a huge range of nonprofits and where they approach a particular issue. And so within Arlington.
So we require donations to a public art fund that then the county administers. So
Right.
could there be like an equity fund that then we administer?
Interesting.
And
Right.
plus getting into this topic as part of our looking for sustainability, environmental issues, seems to muddy it, because there's certainly, I'm on board with environmental justice issues. I get what those are, but I'm not sure that what we're doing with new construction and others really has a lot of impact there.
I don't know though. I mean, our equity resolution that I think the planning commission passed and the county passed was like, we should be thinking about justice issues with everything that we do.
Again, I agree. I wrote it, so I absolutely agree. Yeah, so I agree. That's what I'm saying. I'm really on board with environmental justice, but I agree with you. Said, how do we measure it? We have to be conscious of it, and we should just be discussing it. How does this affect? But to have it in the program itself and pulling it in makes me, it's too loosey-goosey. And I don't know how you measure it other than it's almost performative. And I don't want that. I want something that really matters and works when we're approaching those issues.
So I have a comment and a question. Maybe this will help. I don't know if it will totally resolve your concerns, but so my question is, so with the EJ tool, so that's the US, is that the US Green Building Council EJ tool? Is that what I heard? Right. So
Right.
they do, if the applicant if uses the tool, does an assessment, what's the expectation after that assessment is conducted as far as like reporting, action, anything of that nature?
They would provide that report to us, and in that report, they would discuss how they're going to assess those issues and what the next actions would be.
Okay.
As part of the other baseline prerequisite for this integrative process with the county's green building staff, so referring to Vicky and I, that would be probably part of that integrative process workshop in which we would discuss this DEI baseline requirement. And if they chose to pursue that first option using the building EJ tool and completing that assessment and narrative and the course of the next actions, that would be discussed throughout each phase of the design, as well as, providing that report at a permit phase for construction as well.
But will they, I'm putting you on the spot, but do we have an idea of like whether they'll be required to take certain actions or what I'm getting at is EJ is really tough like right now. Like there are debates at the highest levels of government and public policy about, I think there's less disagreement about the fact that environmental justice is important, that it's important to remedy the fact that, many communities, disadvantaged communities have been disadvantaged in many, intentionally many years, citing decisions, a lot of pollution, Port Arthur, Texas, like there are countless examples of that. The hard part, I'm just stating the super obvious, the hard part is like, how do you do that in a way that promotes, good climate action, also promotes like justice, but that's a hard thing to define because we're talking about policy, not like law, like not, legal proceeding here. And I think there are different, views on that. And there's a view of adding process. And I think there's a contrasting view. There's the tension of getting these buildings built to really high standards in of itself is likely advancing environmental justice because we're getting people into better situations. We're building more dense housing. And sometimes I worry, this is not fault of any of the staff. I'm just articulating kind of the challenge I suspect you're grappling with. There are massive EJ problems we're dealing with as a community and a country that deal with a lot of things we can't control. And so we naturally focus on the things we can control, which is this. And I just want to make sure that we're not like over scrutinizing the new buildings when really it's like everything else sort of deserves a lot of heavy scrutiny, but we can't control it. So we're focusing on it here.
It's a little forest for the trees.
Yeah.
Because we know from planning commission, environmental justice issues, we know the tree cover is greatest in the wider parts of Arlington than it is in the where there's people of color. We see that, we know that's there, and that's an environmental justice issue. But that's, as Eric said, that's a larger planning issue and a larger policy issue, which any one building will help, but it's not everything we do here contributes to going the right direction in those things. We don't have to even say DEI in it, because just building these buildings the way we want is going in the right direction and will address those issues very hyper locally, but it will address, there'll be more tree cover. There will be more, which will be cooling things, which will help whatever the neighborhood that it's built in, especially if it's built, our older buildings are in our poor communities too. So that's exactly where we want them to go to fix these environmental justice issues. So anything we can do to get these new buildings going and these converted buildings, these older buildings converted, is almost by definition contributing to environmental justice.
I don't want to leave, and I'll get you, Joan. I don't want to leave like you with the impression that I'm saying don't like just cut this out.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying at all. I imagine this is probably things you were thinking about already, right? This is really like the EJ stuff is so darn difficult, and I'm not even bringing politics into it yet, right? It's so darn difficult. I guess what I'm saying is I don't think that like something like this should be the reason the project doesn't go forward, but I absolutely think we have to think about it, and it should be in the policy. I just think it's a matter of how far we turn the dial as far as kind of pushing applicants to do certain things.
Costing money.
And the cost and time are like the two biggest equities in projects.
It would be great if
Yeah.
we had a chance to look at the language of the three options. If you have, a sense of, well, maybe this one is the sort of better direction than that.
I mean, the EJ tool is a great, like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think using an EJ, like a screening tool like that, I'm not as familiar with the US.
I've just pulled it up to.
There's the federal government has ones.
Right.
I think that's a great place to go. The extremely hard thing that is not fair to ask you to come up with right now is what's the after action? And once you've done analysis, sort of what does that look like? And what's a reasonable expectation for an applicant at this point in one project and one locality in our country to sort of do? I think that's where we don't know. And I don't think it's reasonable for us to arrive at a perfect answer right now, but I think at least requiring some screening and assessment is a great place to start as a baseline.
Yeah, Eric, I'll just, sorry, go ahead.
Paul, Paul, go ahead.
I was just going to add one point to that. As you're going through and looking at the red line text and the proposed update to the DEI requirement, I would also advise you to look at the current DEI requirement, the 2020 Green Building Policy, which requires at least one member of the development team be employed by an organization with a DEI inclusion program within its management operations. When we were going through these conversations with developers early on in the process, and even industry folks such as sustainability consultants who are working on these projects with their clients every day, one of the issues that was, I don't want to say issue because DEI is an issue, but one of the challenges involved in the current program was the DEI requirement, and it didn't seem to be focused on what the county's needs or goals were for equity in that scope, or even equity within the lens of the real estate and development community. So I think, going through this proposal, obviously it's not a one size fits all approach. I think that's why we're offering options. I just want to clarify that we're not mandating any developer to donate a percentage of their construction costs to a nonprofit. There's three options involved. And I think, this was the first, use the phrase, the first bite of the apple at this baseline requirement and updating it and looking at it in a more deeper and contextual lens in how does a new development or a conversion or adaptive reuse project, fit into the built environment where it's proposed? How does it reflect the values of that community? How does it meet their needs? How does it thrive within that community? So I think, looking throughout that lens, and as we know, obviously equity is part of the three pillars of sustainability, and it's an important one at that. So I think this was kind of really the first bite at the apple of updating this language around this baseline prerequisite. But I acknowledge your feedback and comments, and certainly we'll take a look back at what we're proposing for those three options. And I know we had a comment even in the public comment period and speaking with developers about that option 3 for donating a percentage of the construction costs. So there's things to revise and resubmit. So we'll look at that.
I appreciate that, Paul. I know Commissioner McIntyre is back online. If you're able, we'd love to hear your question or comment. Jen?
Yeah, kind of going back to the electrification and actually energy performance is, our commission has looked at that, and energy performance we think can be much higher or can be higher, especially across the board as the baseline. Again, they really want to achieve the climate adaptation pathway or the International Living Futures Institute certification, both of which, but should be, we do think, because there's really no change from the existing GBI for overall energy efficiency. But then the other thing is the electrification, is that's critical. If you build in fossil systems in the building, you're stuck with it for 15, 20 years. And that's not the direction we're going. It's digging us deeper into the hole in our carbon emissions. So, we've pushed, and I know commissioners know that our commission has made that point numerous times at SPRC meetings, is that, we really need to push this towards electrification. With the, and when we've talked to people in the building sustainability element, is mostly it's a doable thing if it's done from the beginning. This can be, planned for and developed, and the technology has advanced and continues to advance since the 2019 update or 2020 update. So, it's again a matter of planning in advance with the expectation. And at this point, I don't think we should be worrying too much about what's going to happen into the grid more broadly. Hopefully those things will work out. Clearly it's some serious issues, but again, it'll be self-defeating if we don't take and expect developers to take the steps to do that. And then the only is with the existing buildings, we want to try to get a way of having them at least thinking about how they're going to get to an electrified building, even if when they start participating, they're not replacing some of those existing systems. Because again, We're trying to get to zero by 2050, and we don't do that by building in fossil systems. And I think even for some of the issues that we talked about a little earlier, there's battery backup storage as a potential alternative to generators, a lot quieter. They also have a potential for helping to manage and balance the grid during peak periods. And even, in the kitchens is mentioned that, Amazon and Met Park actually made that exception for their retail kitchens. And I believe they ended up finding tenants that were willing to go all electric. So, I think those are things that are probably really not as much of a barrier as one would think.
Thanks, Joan. So I think what we're going to do here, commissioners, is this is kind of open. So if you have more questions or comments, but before I get to you, Commissioner Peterson, so it's 8:28. So I'm going to guesstimate that we'll start public comment. I would say no later than like 8:45. Looking at the table, Tenley, that works. You think we can wrap up in 15 minutes?
I'd probably say everything.
Okay. All right. So we will start public comment no later than 8:45. So if you have not done so already and you would like to make public comment, make sure to throw your name in the chat and just let Natasha know that we're going to do that. And I think we usually do what, 2? Yeah. Okay. One person so far. Okay.
No, I mean, there's only one.
Public comment so far. Okay. Public. John. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's it. Got it. All right. Commissioner Peterson.
Okay. So for the program that bases the benefits on performance, what happens if the performance measures aren't met down the road? Do they get a fine, or they just don't get, for the new construction?
So with the climate adaptation pathway, the idea is that they receive the certification based on the testing and the performance, and then that's when they get the incentive.
Okay, so if somebody gets everything looking great on day one, but then 5 years down the road, they're not keeping things up to date. They're not like, maybe they've replaced some windows, or we don't have a way to go back and check. I thought one of the differences to this new approach is that we're actually like measuring the performance versus like, did you theoretically do the right thing, but like, how is it actually playing out in real life?
We do require them for 10 years to give us their energy use
Okay,
monthly.
okay.
So we do track that.
And so
In fact,
their energy use falls outside of the approved.
Yeah,
metrics.
so we're seeing how they're performing in terms of energy and carbon, because they have to do it through Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And it's been interesting. We've required that now for this most recent iteration of the incentive policy, and most people are complying, a few are not. We just had a call today about non-compliant ones, so what to do about that. We can, as I learned, we can fine them. And if they do not respond, we can even potentially jail them.
Oh.
Whoa.
Okay,
Or at least bring them to lawyerly heel.
okay.
Well, let's not get to lawyerly. As a lawyer, I don't want to
Okay,
get.
sorry.
Let's
Okay.
get a better hammer than lawyerly.
Fine. Okay. And so for the incentives that we're talking about, is that like we're going to be writing them a check with taxpayers' money, or
Yes.
are we just decreasing fees and taxes?
No, it would actually be a check. It would be cash incentive.
Okay.
Right.
We did initially go down the road of a tax reduction, and they're going to try and make this kind of simple and clear, because you had to go through a lot. Virginia law does not allow you to do any tiering or any variation in a green incentive program based on tax incentives. So everything would have to be the same. It would have to be the same rate. It would have to be the same conditions. And when you go to give, for example, a percentage against an existing building, where the building may have a worth of $98 million, in order to get an incentive that's going to be worthy of attracting a developer, the percentage is going to have to go higher. But you can't vary that percentage for a fuse at a new building where you may have a value of a building that's 250 million. So there was no way, and we literally went through a very long session with the county attorney's office on that to see if there was any way that we could maybe nuance anything. And the Virginia law is fairly rigid on it.
Well, just to add, I mean, another important point was that if you're giving tax abatements, we're proposing the tax abatements go for these 3 new pathways. No, Virginia law requires you to give the same abatement to the lead buildings, to the traditional.
But that's what I thought I just,
Oh.
explained. It was
Oh,
the
sorry.
same percentage. It was the same, yeah.
Okay, I thought you were talking about the tiers. I'm sorry, yeah.
Is there a cap on how much incentives we will give out that the county manager is prepared in the budget? Or if like everybody in the county was like, yes, we're coming in and it's $30 million. And
We talked about that.
is this, and have you all assessed that like, this is the best use of $3.2 million if these 4 buildings converted and like, or, you know, there isn't something that we could do with $3.2 million that would get us to our CEP goals even more so?
It's an interesting question. We did talk about, I mean, Montgomery County has done this where they've said, you know, it's kind of like first come, first served. You've got this amount of money, you know, get your feet in the door. Here it is for you. You're too late. No dice. So that's one possibility to keep the costs lower. But to your more important point, you know, could we not do something more impactful in terms of carbon reductions with that 3 million? When you look at our carbon intensity as a county,
Look at the dashboard.
we're doing pretty well on a lot of other stuff. I mean, we're very transit oriented. So, you know, we're pedestrianized, we're increasingly multimodal. So transit emissions are doing pretty well.
Like running more bus routes to make buses more convenient, to make more people rely on them, things like that.
I mean, that if the data shows that transit is the thing that should be improved, maybe, you know, would it be, I mean, I can pull up the slide deck and look at kind of what this is also
Well, it is
2016
more of a
data.
question of.
Buildings are
Yeah,
part
Your
of the,
largest percentage.
and
And the other thing is that both the overwhelming majority of our greenhouse gas emissions are transportation and building related. And over 96% of that is through the private sector, private choices. So
would we, I mean, I'm looking at the countywide emissions by source. I mean, would we start cracking down on individual car ownership for transit emissions? I mean, that's over, you know, that's about just under 15%. You know, I don't know. That would maybe cause citizen outrage.
I would say that's probably right.
Don't go there.
That's probably right.
Okay, I just wanted to
And there,
think about like the. most
no,
efficient
it's a
use of
great,
tax
it's a
dollars.
great
This is-
question.
This is where we should be spending the money.
I think we should spend it on buildings, but it is a great question. There are things in this, of course, that we can't control. That,
And is this the right amount of money, but no more, to like actually make it economically feasible? So we do hear from developers saying, you know, adaptive reuse is too expensive, it's not worth it. And so is this the right amount of money without paying too much to get them to actually say, you know what, now you've made it attractive to us, so we will put the effort in.
that's why we're asking that question of all of these developers. Are these incentives attractive?
Go ahead,
Would you do this?
Yeah, I agree with Peterson's direction he's going here, because we could, when recessions hit, county's budget shrinks. I mean, the county's income shrinks, but the budget doesn't. You know, we end up in it's very, very difficult budget years. And if we're spending, 7 figures to a developer, that's not going to go over really well when it gets in the newspapers, which it will. during the budget sessions. So we have to think about that when we have to think about worst case scenarios. What happens when the money isn't there for that year or 2 years or whatever? How is that going to work? Is this creating a right that as long as they're compliant with and giving the numbers we want, we have no choice but to write a check to them? That I can understand that. That's part of the incentive that they can rely on. Developers want to be able, and their lenders, more importantly, want to be able to rely on that. That's an income stream.
Right.
Well, we as a county have different priorities. We have taxpayers, we have constituents we have to answer to. And it's their tax money that's doing this.
Right.
And that's not a certain amount every year.
Right.
It was never designed to be open-ended. We did anticipate that there would be either a total per year financial cap or a total project cap, or where you're putting a fee out per square foot, a total, square foot. In Montgomery County, they're quite more fortunate than we are. They're allowed to have, impose a public goods charge on their fuels that brings in around 175 to $180 million a year. And that's dedicated towards their energy and their climate programs. So for example, their green bank, they've taken that funding, 10% goes off the top to the green bank, and they've bought down all of their fees and just about all of their interest. So we're struggling in Virginia because we don't have anything like that. The governor withdrew us out of Reggie, so that money, even though it was targeted towards 2 specific purposes. The incumbent utilities do not have any local government partnership programs like others do. So there's, and the Commonwealth doesn't have grant programs that are kind of varied and robust. So there's really very, very little funding sources and alternative funding sources that really are able to be tapped into, even on a competitive basis in Virginia.
So right now, an applicant comes to us and applies for green building because they get the density, and we don't have to write them a check right at the end. So is it that to get the green building incentive policy certification, we're making it so much harder that it's going to cost the Bartlett 1.5 million extra dollars to get that certification, and therefore it's worth it to us to give them a check for that amount at the end of the process? Or like we don't need to pay them to do this right now. So why are we introducing payment going forward?
Because the program, and what we didn't really get in that introduction, is that the program is showing indications in its performance of maybe marching towards self-obsolescence. It's not doing, as over half of the projects that we have in the green building program right now aren't even under the 2021 version. There was a grandfathering period, and over half the projects go back to the prior, before 2021.
But every new project comes to us and they're applying for this program,
They're
right?
not going into construction.
One of the problems we're running into now is none of the projects that we're getting are even approaching the density they're allowed to have.
Yeah.
They're just not doing it. And that's been consistent like 2-3 years now.
But so the
Density
density
is
is enough
becoming-
for the
It's not,
developer.
they don't care anymore. They don't need the density.
They don't need the density, and a lot of them can't use the density because a lot of the new construction is going on in that Pentagon City, Crystal City National Landing Corridor, and because of its proximity to the airport, it's limited
Well,
on
they also
height,
think-
so it can't even use the
Well,
density.
They're not even, they're just building 5/2s.
They think 5/2s get.
They could go to 20 stories and they're not doing it. They're going 5/2s everywhere. And
So-
it's like,
All right, let's do this. Finish this thought and then I'll give you a bit of Jen.
Yeah, so you're thinking that going forward, applicants are going to say, we're not even going to bother with green building incentive program. Therefore, the county should give them the bonus density and a check for $1.5 million if it's the Bartlett example.
They're not telling us that. We did research. The first 6 months of developing this program was really doing a literature review and benchmarking of programs across the country. And, in this region, just to see what other options there may be. And there are not a lot of options, to be quite frank.
To get the developers interested in building green
We
buildings.
would have much preferred to, opt like we did originally with the tax abatement.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, I think Arlington, while we are headed towards some tougher economic times, that's predicted, we still are better off than I think many other parts of the country because of our proximity to Washington, D.C. So therefore, maybe we could pay developers a little bit less than what like somebody in other smaller parts of the country that may be more impacted by nationwide economic shifts that like we have a little bit of protection from being right outside of Washington, D.C.
Really, this lobby to change the building codes,
Yeah,
to tighten them up.
that's another fight. All right, Commissioner McIntyre, you've been waiting patiently. Go ahead.
Yeah, we've kind of raised the issue on the cash funding is we have kind of serious concerns that, there's not going to be enough money. The source of funding actually hasn't been identified. And it's inevitably got to be capped because the budgets just can't handle an open-ended except, we want a program that actually really will bring in lots of participants. So, from our perspective, is a much more robust, flexible incentive package that actually drives the best incentives to get people to the climate adaptation strategy. And those certification programs can be applied to existing buildings. A lot more challenging to do that than for new buildings, but something to actually get as many buildings as possible doing as much as they can given their current circumstances, and making sure that all the new buildings are moving in the direction that we need. And I think in that perspective, tax incentives may have a piece to play if it's really kind of setting high standards that we really want to see all buildings achieve, especially in energy performance. But also access to financing through the ICAP or green banks, helping technical assistance and assistance to getting access to funding through other government programs. Hopefully some of those will survive with the next administration. But I think, again, thinking how this program can be structured to make it as attractive as possible to as many buildings as possible is really what we should be trying to achieve. And we're not sure it's quite there yet. And a lot of that really does require that continued engagement and discussions with the developers to figure out, exactly what it's going to take and find a way of driving them to the direction that we really need to go.
Thanks. All right, Commissioner Pearson, maybe last comment.
Okay, well, I'll just go through it.
Okay.
So I liked with your climate adaptation pathway, looking at noise and impacts of automotive corridors. I'd say, I think if we get more families that can live in multifamily residential housing, that it has a very positive impact on the environment and preventing urban sprawl. So looking at soundproofing inside buildings, most of the people that I talk to that leave apartment buildings with their kids, one of the big reasons is because they got too many complaints from their neighbors. So if we can make living in apartment buildings more comfortable for families, I think that'll have positive impacts on the climate. Okay, accessible vegetated roofs and or landscape areas. I love that it could be accessible, but I wouldn't want someone to say like, well, we're not going to bother with a vegetated roof because it's not accessible, so therefore we don't get credit for it. I think it can provide benefits even if it's not accessible. So, look at possible ways for that. And I guess I just had a general question. What is the feedback that you've been hearing so far?
It's mixed, quite frankly. Now is concerned about aggressive mandate, part of the program. And because it's voluntary, they don't have to do it. Then it becomes too challenging or too difficult. Obviously, we have other stakeholders who want us to do more and have mandates. If I had to guess, I think that there's probably going to be a longer engagement period and a different type of engagement. It may be more productive, and NAOP, I think, in their letter even suggested it, that it might be good to get all of the district parties, because right now the engagement is kind of talking to this group, talking to this group, talking to this group, and then gathering, and then having this centralized comment period. But still, the comment period is on an electronic platform. So that kind of interactivity of having different voices and different ideas in the same room, I think it's probably going to be possibly quite effective here. We didn't want the program to die from misuse or lack of use or inattention. And we wanted to do something a little bit bolder. We had no illusions that what we were coming up with was the best plan, but we thought that it was a good start of the basis of a community conversation on that and really moving forward. Because as Paul said in the beginning, it's been a great program, but after 20 years, if you start seeing those trends going the other way, it's a sign that you either have to abandon the program or revision it.
Well, thank you for your work on it. I mean, I think it's an important program, and especially for meeting our energy goals. And just going back to the budget, I'd hate for the benefits that we can gain from the program to be limited by budget cuts or a tough budget year, or needing to spend money on other things. So if there's ways to incentivize green buildings without it being dependent on the revenues of the year, then I think that would
We've
help
been
us.
digging deep for the hose, and we're hard pressed to come up with them. The options are limited. But
Well, thank you. I have one quick comment. John, been very patient. I'm going to get to public comment in a quick second. Quick comment and then kind of a concluding comment. The e-bikes, I know you know this, but with the e-bikes and multifamily, the issue right now is safe storage. And so just thinking about it's really incentivizing, right? Safe storage. Nobody really wants to put their stuff in a common area especially with e-bikes. I mean, I know you know that, but I'll add my voice.
especially in underserved communities.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's really-
So like safe and likely private storage
Yeah.
solutions are going to be what's the most practical. I just want to associate myself with Commissioner Peterson's comments about appreciating the work you've done. I feel like you are at the intersection of 10,000 things out of your control, like politically, like different levels of government, economic incentives, what gets things built. I think it is a question of sort of how you do things, kind of like an existential question. And I would add my voice to those who are wary of mandates. I know I'm a lawyer, but I think I'm fairly persuaded this is going to get done through incentives and the market wanting to do this. And I think this is what you all are trying to do, is figure out a better way to incentivize this behavior and piloting it. And that's sort of what local government can do, right? Look like you
It would be great
Yeah.
if you had just local rule on your building codes.
Yeah.
That would be a quantum leap, and it would go well beyond any kind of imagination that we and other parties have put towards this. I mean, it's
So I'm just like, my overall philosophy at the moment is we need to not layer on more rules. I think we need to figure out ways to incentivize the behavior we want. I've seen this at the federal level, like just, we have not built out a whole lot of grid. We can talk about clean energy all we want. This is stuff that's out of our control, right? We can talk about clean energy all we want, but if we make it impossible to build grid, it's all pointless. Because none of the clean energy, even if we get it built, actually gets to the people who need it. And that's all the stupid fights that we have to keep having. And so that's out of our control, obviously, but I think it is illustrative of we have created a regime in the United States of just layering on things because we think they'll get solved if we pop them in a process, and ends up killing the projects. And so that's why I was bringing up some concerns about the equity things, not because I don't believe in them, just because I'm sort of like top of mind. Is everything kind of working congruently to get to this goal, which is the building actually gets built, and that these, like, enough of these goals get solved? And obviously the fun job you all have is trying to calibrate that dial perfectly so you get enough things solved, but the thing still gets built and centered, right? And we're all kind of grasping for that. I feel like that's basically what you do, the goal,
I'd
right?
be happy to hear that 80% of our federal grant applications were for equity programs.
Excellent. Well, that's great.
And we weren't just going Justice 40, we were
Sure.
going beyond that, so.
I'll do a lot about Justice 40 after. Okay, so excellent. So John Bloom, thank you so much. Is there any other public speakers other than John? All right, so that concludes the LRPC discussion. So John, you have 2 minutes for public comment, and whenever you're ready, go ahead. And thank you so much for being patient.
Thanks. And if I could indulge and just ask a question first that really I don't think has been clarified. So Dimitri, you were talking about possible kind of multi-stakeholder engagement and some future engagement. Is this proposal still headed for the board in December and to the Planning Commission next week? Is that
Planning Commission probably in January.
Planning Commission?
Board, it'll be sometime. I will be long gone, John.
Okay, well, that probably shortens my comment significantly, because really excited to hear about the idea of multi-stakeholder engagement and some different approaches, and really looking forward to working with you, Dimitra, for as long as you're here, and with staff on an ongoing basis to get this across the finish line. We do think it needed extra time, and
I don't think, if I had to guess, John, and it's just a guess, I don't think it's going to get to the board before March.
and March is a tough month around here with budget season.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for that.
We also will know more, hopefully in January too, or the county will know more about what is actually happening with the budget this year. So there's always a greater level of clarity that comes around January.
And we'll maybe have a final version of LEAD version 5 to look at before long too. So lots of.
I'm a little less hopeful about that.
If they stick to timeline anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll shorten my comments because that basically answers my question, and really just want to thank Dimitra and staff have put in an immense amount of work here, and it is mind-bogglingly complex. We will just work as best we can to help bring this to a good resolution, and again, the idea of multi-stakeholder engagement and some new approaches, all for that too. And since I already, I submitted our letter and you guys had that, maybe you read it. I'll strike the rest of what I was going to say and just say happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Thanks.
You too,
Thanks, John.
John.
Happy Thanksgiving. Great to see you. All right. Well, that concludes our LRPC meeting tonight. So thank you again to Vicky and Dimitra and Paul for the presentation and the questions. And
Thank you
everybody
so much.
take care.
This was terrific.
Yeah, that concludes our meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.